Hey, this is Josh Hernandez, the writer, the host for Must Be Nice. Must be nice to be a business owner. Welcome to the podcast where we interview business owners and get actionable tips and exclusive insights. Check out our newsletter coming out every other Monday at mustbenice.news. Thank you, Sharework, for sponsoring Must Be Nice. They create incredible web designs and can also help you with lead nurturing for SMS and email marketing. They have phenomenal reviews and a lot of sample work on their website. Call them today.
Yeah. So who are you? And what's your
Uh,
business? And how did it get started?
well, I'm Sam. I do custom cookies. So my business actually got started during COVID. So my day job is teaching, and I had just started at this private Montessori school that's in my hometown, Walnut, where I grew up. And I started there in 2019, and then, as we all know, COVID hit in 2020. And during that time, my school closed. So we were kind of with the rest of the world at that time, thinking, oh, yeah, we'll be closed for 2 weeks, And then 2 weeks turned into a month, and then it turned into 6 months. So, yeah. And I also coach a club swim team. And at the time, I was coaching at my local high school that I went to, Walnut High School. So I had pretty long days. I was literally working like 14, 15 hours a day. I would go straight from my classroom to one practice to another practice. So my days were pretty busy. And then I went to doing absolutely nothing when COVID hit. And for me, that was a big culture shock in a way. Like, I mean, for lack of a better word, because I wasn't used to not doing anything. you know, it was kind of fun for the first week, maybe, and then after that, I was like, all right, I got to do something. I can't just sit around here. You know, it was fun to watch Netflix and come, discover all the things that people did during COVID, but I had to do something. So, yeah, that's how I kind of stumbled across cookie making. um, Actually, I had always kind of followed a couple cookiers on Instagram, and kind of admired it from afar. And really, before COVID, it kind of like it was a thing, but not as prevalent as it is now. Um, so I guess that is a silver lining to COVID. But yeah, I followed them from afar, and then with all my downtime, I was like, you know what? I could try that. I could do that. I was like, I've always been pretty crafty, I've always liked baking. So I was like, how hard could it be? Watching Instagram reels, they get it done in a minute, and you're like, yeah, that's easy. I could do that. And I learned pretty quickly that it was going to take some practice to actually get good at it. But yeah, that's how the business was born. There is a one account on Instagram that was like my OG cookie account. It's called the Flower Box Shop. And she's a super nice lady. I've actually, we've spoken via DM. Uh, I reached out to her for some tips because she's always like very personable online. So I was like, I might as well give it a shot. If she doesn't reply, no harm, no foul. But she's very nice. But yeah, she was the OG one where, I learned a lot of tricks from her. And then the next one that really influenced me is called A Modern Cookie. Again, a really super sweet lady. I've reached out to her a few times too. She's based out of Arizona. But those two accounts really taught me a lot about the basics and kind of helped me get my feet wet so that I could have it down enough to start exploring on my own.
Wow. So you cold messaged these accounts and you got the response from them. And was it
I
was it
did.
really a warm welcoming, or did you kind of have to send a message to a couple of different accounts?
You know what? It was very warm welcome. That's the thing that I really learned about this kind of community of like home bakers. Because a lot of these people, they just do it out of their homes. Very few of them have brick and mortar shops. And if they do, they kind of partner with somebody else who does maybe cakes or like macarons or another specialty. Um, but they're all very friendly. Nobody like gatekeeps their secrets. If you see somebody doing something cool and you're like, oh my gosh, how'd you do that? They're like, you know, yeah, everybody's like trying to do their own thing, but it's very, very open and very welcoming, which I found, like you said, I just messaged these people that I'd been following for a while, and they had no hesitation. They want everybody to succeed. So it's actually been really cool getting kind of into that community and becoming a part of it.
Yeah. And so, prior to this, were you, baking like your entire life since childhood?
Earliest, I was actually thinking about it before we jumped on today, and the earliest I remember doing something like this was in fifth grade. I remember the big fifth grade project at my elementary school was we had to pick a state and do this big report about that state. So I ended up with Texas, which I thought at the time was super cool because my aunt lives in Texas. And one of the options that you had to do was you could make a cake shaped like your state, but you had to decorate it like topographically. So I made a chocolate cake and I cut it out in the shape of Texas, and I was using little Hershey Kisses for the mountains. So that was my earliest, jump into the baking pool. But I've always just enjoyed baking. Like around the holidays, I would do a ton of cookies, just not super decorated ones like I do now, but I'd branch out snickerdoodles, chocolate chip cookies. I'd mess with recipes, try to see different, baking times, different ingredients. I try to find my own secret ingredient. A lot of times they didn't turn out super great, but yeah, I've always been into it, but just not at that level until I had all this time on my hands. So I thought, why not give it a shot?
Yeah. And so, when you were doing this, obviously it sounded like you were crafting different recipes and such. Were you
Hmm.
good? Or were you kind of not so good to start with?
um, it actually did take me a lot more trial and error than I thought to find a good sugar cookie recipe, because there were a lot of recipes that I had that tasted good, but they didn't hold their shape. And there were a lot of ones that I would have to do a lot of steps in between. So I'd have to like freeze the dough before I rolled it out, cut them out, freeze it again. So like all of that takes a lot of time, especially when you're trying to make, you know, more than a dozen. So I was trying to find a recipe that could hit all those bases for me, that tasted good, that didn't go stale really quickly. Obviously held its shape, because that's, a big thing in decorating cookies. It has to look like what you want it to look like. Um, and I actually ended up buying a recipe off of another cookier, and that's the recipe that I've used ever since. It's phenomenal. It checks all the boxes, hits everything I need it to hit, and it's a really easy recipe to memorize. So I've had that locked and loaded for a while now.
Wow. And so so it sounded like you had to buy this recipe, right? That was like your
Mm,
supreme, like this is it. I'm
yeah.
curious, how did you shop around for that? It's not like I can taste it online, right? Obviously
Yeah.
there's eye appeal, but the photography is really good, right? So
Yeah.
what kind of was that process? Like, did you, resort to that too, just because, like you had some trial and error?
Yeah, it was kind of a, at first, I had seen people selling their recipes. And at first I was like, oh, I don't need to pay for a recipe. I could figure it out on my own. And then after a while of not figuring it out on my own, I was like, well, they're selling it for a reason, so I might as well try it.
Okay.
I did I did try a couple, and uh I ended up buying, I think, maybe three or four sugar cookie recipes. Um the other ones were good. They were One was really tasty, but if you left the cookie out for more than a day, it got really hard really fast. And with my process, that just didn't fit my timeline. So as much as that one tasted really good, that one I ended up not using. There was another one where it went by weight instead of like a measuring cup. And for me, again, that was just too time consuming for me to try to weigh everything out and make sure it's at the exact specification. Because as much as I am kind of an eyeball cook, and even sometimes baking when I'm not doing, cookies like this, it is actually a science. And if you get it a little bit off, it's going to affect how your cookie comes out. Um, Even, if you're baking on a light sheet versus a dark sheet, it affects the time in the oven. It's the same recipe, same temperature, but sometimes they're in for 2 minutes longer. So that was another thing that I really had to fine tune throughout this process, because everybody tells you, oh, baking's a science, baking's a science. You're like, yeah, kind of, but it really is. So that's kind of how I ended up on the recipe that I ended up using.
Wow. And so, when you bought these recipes, right, is there kind of like a range, right? How much does a recipe cost?
So the one that I use, that's my tried and true. I think I paid $25 for that one. It was all of them were probably between 15 and 25. So all in all, I probably spent tops $100 on recipes.
Okay. And so, when you started this, right, obviously, some people say, oh, I'm going to bake everything. What made you really focus on cookies? Was it just like an internal passion, or did you kind of read the market a little bit?
Honestly, I did kind of try to hit everything, but cookies was the one that I just kind of found my groove in. Cakes, I just could not nail cakes. I could never get it right. Getting the frosting smooth, the different types of frosting. I mean, if I thought cookies was a science, cakes is a whole nother world. So the people that do cakes, I have the utmost respect for those people. Um, I did try to venture into macarons, which are a French cookie, but they are very delicate, and if you don't get it right, they will turn out not great. So
Yeah.
uh, I tried to do that a couple times. I think I nailed it once, but that was enough for me.
Wow. It's so impressive too that you were able to start this business, and you didn't do any culinary background necessarily at all, right? You were
No.
just home bake, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. And so obviously, we're going to go more depth into the business, but, how nice is it to have this business? Is it, just purely passion? Is there a nice profit at the end of the day? Does it, help pay for anything major outside of, of course, your teaching salary?
hmm yeah, actually, the profit margin is pretty nice for what it takes me to make an order versus what I can get profit wise. Um, when I started it, it was kind of to be a main source of income at the time for COVID because I wasn't working. Um, at the time, I was quarantining with my parents, and luckily I'm fortunate enough to have parents who didn't, they didn't ask me for rent at the time, but I still felt for myself I need to contribute and I need to at least have an income to do the things that I want to do. um and I didn't know when I was going to be going back to work because, like I said, I had just started at that school the year before, so I had barely got a year under my belt. So when they did reopen, it was in a very small capacity and they offered it based on seniority. So because I
Wow.
was one of the last new hires, my name was going to be last on the list to get called. So
So you kind of needed this to work, right?
yeah, I did.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, yeah.
Well, so you got this business going. It's in a way kind of a new source of income, right?
hmm
Outside of your teaching job. So that's nice. Of course, having a business and being a teacher, that must be nice too. But it comes with its challenges, I bet.
It
Um,
does.
so what kind of life do you live now? Being a teacher and a business owner than when you were just being a teacher that first year.
Yeah. It is busier, and I do, I have to manage my time very well. I am, I kind of like to say I'm a mix of a type A and a type B person. I like to have lists planned out, but do I always follow those lists? Not always. But it has really forced me to make sure that all my ducks are in a row leading into a week, or if I know I have an event coming up or something like that. Because, at the end of the day, if I don't, then I'm letting people down. And for me, obviously, teaching is a passion for me, which at this point in time, I'm not sure I'm ready to walk away from. But being able to do cookies for me, it's like my favorite part is when I see the customer's face and they just like light up, and that just makes me so happy. And so that for me, that makes like the late, if I have a late night, things like that makes it worth it.
Wow, that's incredible. And so I know, we talked about you bought this recipe, right?
hmm
So the square step one, right? Figure out the recipe. You got that figured out. Step two, right? How did you get customers? How did you build an online, web store? How did it go? How did you, draw demand?
Yeah, well, it started where the original curiosity came from, on Instagram. myself an Instagram page for my cookie account. Um, and it started kind of, really grassroots, word of mouth. I had a lot of friends and a lot of family who, kind of spread it around. My parents have been active. I grew up in Walnut for a very long time. My parents lived there for a very long time. So it was kind of word of mouth. They're big in the community. And I would just kind of donate my cookies to locations I knew would get a lot of traffic. So like I did some for teachers, when they were going back on online teaching. I dropped some off at our local elementary school for Halloween. And my mom knew their office manager, so I was able to get a list of all the teachers' names. So I made a custom cookie for all the teachers, things like that. So I would kind of donate them to, like I said, areas I knew people would get a lot of traffic, or like people that would get a lot of exposure. And so from that started to kind of grow. Oh, hey, I heard you do cookies. And then, kind of it started with word of mouth, and then, Instagram. And I would just go follow a bunch of people and be like, when you get that random follow, you're like, who's this? And you kind of check out their page a little bit. So that was one of the strategies. And, yeah, I did start my own web page, but to be honest, it hasn't been updated in a while.
Yeah. And so, when you got these cookies, these are free orders and you custom made these for,
Yeah,
the particular, school or organization you're going
yeah,
to?
yeah. It was
Wow.
a mix of, yeah, I want to get my name out there, see what I can do, but it also, I'm a teacher as well, so I know what they're going through, and I know that online learning was hard for everybody. So if I could make their day a little bit brighter with a cookie with their name on it, then I was happy to do it.
Oh, wow. And, building these cookies for free, were you also kind of testing the market at the same time? Was there any like, what were you doing at that time when in those first batches?
Yeah, yeah. I was kind of, it was also kind of practice for me. I still hadn't felt like I had made enough where I could, almost wasn't quite comfortable, charging people for them at the time, which was a part of it why I did donate a lot of them at the beginning. Um, and especially for me, because I'm a perfectionist. So, to me, it could not look great, but then, like I said, people light up when they see them. Um, but, you know, yeah, it was a little bit of trial and error for me as well. Um, so it also was kind of like testing out, like, oh, how much would you pay for that? Kind of getting my feet wet in the developing, a price range for what I was offering.
Yeah. And when you're developing these prices and such, like did you, create like advertisements as well, like like physical cards along with your cookies?
Hmm.
Is that something you did yourself?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, I mean, I am a one man shop, so
Wow.
I did uh, print, on Canva, I would just print out cardstock, like kind of backers for the cookies, and I would just put it on the back, and I'd put my Instagram on there, I'd put my email on there. Hey, if you're interested in an order, this is where you can find me. And I did, at the time while I was still, trying to figure out what I wanted to charge, I did do kind of a deep dive of cookie, other cookie and home bakers, to kind of see what they were charging. So I would go, a lot of them had like an order here link or something like that. So I would go check out how much they were charging, and then I would kind of go from there.
Well, and what was kind of one of your first orders that, getting that transaction, having the money come in your pocket after making all these free cookies? What was that? How did that feel like?
Yeah, it was it was one of my dad's football buddies who saw me on Instagram, and he's like, I remember he said, "Okay, it's time for me to stop just watching all your cookies. Like, how much is gonna take?" And he kind of, that was his message to me, and I was kind of like, that was my first one, like really asking to buy something from me. So I was like, I almost wanted to be like, "Oh, don't worry about it. I'll make it for you." But then I was like, kind of stopped myself. I was like, "No, if he wants to pay me, I'm gonna let him pay me." But yeah, it was a Halloween order. I remember I had that was when I was very first starting to like put it up for sale, and I had done a little small option of pre-orders. So I had just decorated cookies, and those were going to be the options that people could select. And so he was one of the first ones, or he was the first one to message me and be like, "Hey, let's do it."
Wow. And so you have this customer, your first customer, and it'll kind of reaffirm that, hey, this business has value, right?
Yeah.
Was there any other like memorable interactions with customers, or even lately, now that, brightens you down and gets you going?
Yeah. I think the first like big kind of thing that I offered that I was like, oh, people are really resonating with this. I had seen uh, somebody else in another state had offered like a DIY cookie kit. So they basically baked blank cookies and then bagged icing and provided sprinkles and things. And it was for a Halloween kit. And I was like, you know what? That's a great idea. Especially that was the COVID year. So I was like, I'm sure people aren't going to be, out trick or treating like they normally would. Let me give them another option to do at home that we can do safely and not have to worry about getting around other people. And that took off. I got so many orders for that one. I had only put up, I think maybe 20 or 25, and they were gone so quick. And so that was a moment where I was like, oh wow, people are actually into what I'm offering.
Wow, that's incredible. Wow. And
Yeah.
so, that's an extremely like positive moment, in your business, right? Has
Hmm.
there been any like, negative ones at all?
Um, you know what? I don't think I've like to me personally that I don't know if they do it behind my back, but to me, I don't nobody has ever expressed disappointment in what I've provided for them. I did the only kind of negative thing is somebody did ask me one time, they sent me the bottom of the cookie. And so, when you roll it out, sometimes the bottom part of the cookie is not always as smooth as the top. So they sent me a picture of the bottom and they were like, oh, my cookie's cracked. Is it supposed to be like that? And I was kind of just had to explain like, no, it's not, that wasn't the surface that got rolled out. So it's not always completely smooth. But at that time I was like, oh no, like, what did I do? And then,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate to have people who have been super supportive, and so I haven't really had kind of a moment that's like, oh man, like questioned if this is what I want to do.
Yeah. And so, we just talked about that experience where, your business blew up, right, with the
Hmm.
Halloween kits. Was there any like pivotal moments like that as well? Would you say, that was kind of like the biggest like launching point for you?
Yeah, actually, because of those cookie kits, somebody that runs the Yelp LA Instagram account had met, and I had done also. I had offered an option for Thanksgiving as well as for Christmas that year because the Halloween ones did so well. And she messaged me and she's like, "Hey, this is a great idea," and she said that because of the COVID time, Yelp was offering free online classes for their Yelp Elite members. And so basically, what they could do is the class itself was free, but you had to purchase the kit that whoever the host was selling. So when she explained it to me, she said, "Oh, our last one was like a gourmet coffee making class." So the person provided all the ingredients and then kind of walked them through how to make all these different coffee drinks. And at the time, she was like, um, when she talked to me, she's Valentine's Day and Lunar New Year was the next holiday coming up, and she had asked if I would be interested in doing a class. And at the time, that was the first time that anybody had approached me about doing a class. But for me as a teacher, I didn't have any hesitation doing that because I was like, yeah, this is what I'm good at. This is my jam. But at the time, she had told me, oh, the last person that did it sold 65 kits. And when I heard that, I was like, oh man, 65 is a lot because I offered 6 cookies per kit. So if you times that by 65, that's a lot of cookies. So I was like, in my head, I was like, that's a lot, but you know what? I can make it work. If we give them a deadline, I can plan it out. I ended up having to make because I sold over 150 kits. So that was a huge pivotal moment for me. And then almost 250 people tuned into the class. So they, like I said, the class was free, so they could tune in even if they didn't buy, the product. But after that, obviously, that was a great moment of exposure for me. So I got a ton of orders from people who participated in the class, or they saw the review on Yelp because they posted a page of a review for that event that you could look up on Yelp, just like if you were looking up a restaurant or something like that. So to this day, I still have people who were in that class that ordered cookies from me. So that was a huge moment for me, and that was kind of like, oh my gosh, it was, yeah.
Hey Sam, so let me ask you this: how many cookies would you say you make on like your most banging week of the month? Right? How many cookies are you making?
Obviously, holidays are a huge hit. Halloween, Christmas, obviously, but also back to school and teachers appreciation are the big ones for me. I think the most at any one week I've had to make is maybe 300.
Wow,
So
300 cookies, and so you're
yeah.
doing it like in the home oven by a couple dozen, right?
Yeah, well, that's making the dough and rolling it out doesn't take that long, but because you go back to baking being a science, it's hard to put two pans in at the same time, even though you have enough racks in your oven to do it. So it's kind of like you got to take it one at a time. It takes 10 to 12 minutes for each rack to go in there. So if you're trying to bust out 300 cookies, that takes up a good chunk of your day.
Wow,
But luckily, we just moved into a new place that has a double oven, so I'm very excited about that. I've yet to
wow.
make my first batch in there, but I'm excited for it. It's going to be next week.
That's great. When you're doing this business, you have your teaching job. It's a struggle in a way of like managing your time, right? What does your average week look like, right? Are you just nonstop work? I come home, I gotta plan my cookies, or do everything for these cookies, and then I'm gonna bake them, or are you, doing yoga in the morning and, really like, conceptualizing your week? Like, what's really kind of like going on that makes you, be able to do this?
Yeah, so you know, for the most part, a lot of the cookies I'm making are for events on the weekend, like a birthday party or a baby shower or something like that. So it's usually a Saturday, Sunday. So for me, I pretty much have my routine down for the week. So I'll do a bake if it's so let's say the event's on a Saturday. I'll do a bake day on Wednesday where I make the dough, I'll roll out the cookies, I bake them, I'll let them cool to room temperature, and then I put them in an airtight container. Thursday, I'll do my base layer. So, you know, this is dependent on the design, but if it's something that requires a lot of details, I'll do base layers on Thursday. I'll let those completely dry. And then Friday night, I'll go in and add the details. That way, when I make the cookies, I don't like them to not be sealed for more than 2 to 3 days. So I'll put them. That's why I'll put them when they're fresh but not decorated yet. I'll put them in the airtight container to keep them fresh, and then they could be out for the base layer and the details. And then afterward, I will heat seal them. And then once they're heat sealed, they'll stay fresh for up to 2 weeks. I mean, I made cookies for a wedding one time that my friend had gone to, and she said the bride was eating them like a month later and they were still fresh. So
Mhm.
I always tell people up to 2 weeks just to be on the safe side. But yeah, so that's my cookie making. But obviously I still have my day job, so I'll go to work. That's why I try to kind of parcel it out versus trying to all do it in 1 or 2 nights, because I know I'll just be up way too late and then try to function the next day at school. But then, on those off days, Monday, Tuesday, those are the nights that, I'll take to do something for myself, to do something that helps me relax, kind of, mentally prepare myself for the rest of the week, or decompress from things that happen during my day, or, what have you. But luckily, I'm very fortunate to have a great support system. So um, it does provide me the opportunity to do this. Whereas, if I was just by myself, it would be a lot harder.
Is there any plans or, milestones that A, that you've hit, in a way that you'd love to discuss, but B, you also have coming up that you want to hit?
Yeah, I would actually really love to get into teaching more classes. I did do a couple other online ones, and I've done one in-person class, but I really enjoy doing them. It it also kind of helps people realize like, hey, this is actually harder than I thought it was. Because I did have one person at a class tell me, oh, I kind of booked this class so you could show me how to do it for my daughter's wedding. And then we did the class, she realized I could never do that. So, um, but to be honest, you know, again, I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I have a very supportive partner, and it can be that if down the line I wanted to step away from teaching and do cookies full time, you know, I'm fortunate enough to have that opportunity, which might be in the future, could be something that, I want to take on, but at this time I'm really happy just, doing both. Uh, Pregnant, wanting advice on how to do cookies. I had this one baker from New York who was like, "Oh my gosh, I had posted about buying that cookie recipe and saying, it's my new fave. I'm never going to go back." And she was like, asking me just a bunch of tips, how do you make sure that the icing consistency is correct and things like that. And she did cakes. So we kind of went back and forth giving each other tips, and she would send me pictures of her cookies. I'd send her pictures of my cakes, and we did some recipe swaps. So, if anybody needs advice, I'm here to help.
Yeah. And that's awesome. It sounds like the community is like so warm and welcoming,
Mm-hmm.
right? But and like you said, your origin story was kind of that out of some passion, but also a necessity, right? With
Yeah.
COVID, what if you didn't have that passion for cookies? What would there have been another business that you would have wanted to have started, or what do you think you would have done? Would you have still done the business, or?
Yeah, definitely. If I didn't have a passion for it, I would have dropped it a long time ago, especially going back to work full time. Um, it just would have been something that would have been easy to take off my plate. But had I not gotten into cookies, I think I probably would have, a lot of people pivoted to like t-shirt making or, selling crafts on Etsy. So that probably would have been the next step if the cookies didn't work out. Because like I said, I've always been kind of crafty, and I was like, I have a steady hand. I could do that. The one thing that was a challenge though is because I'm left-handed, and a lot of the people that I follow are right-handed. So my technique has to be a little bit different, especially when I'm doing cookies that have like names or writing on them. So I have a little pocket projector that will display the image or word on the cookie for me. I do have to kind of position myself in a funky way so that I don't block the projection onto the cookie as I'm doing it. But other than that, yeah.
That's awesome. And when you're doing the cookies, and you're making this business, right? Is there anything like different that you do with like your transactions or delivering the cookies? Like, I bet those are hurdles in and of themselves, right?
Yeah, for the most part, I do pickups only. If it's something local and like if it's a family friend or something like that, and they're within the same city, I usually don't have a problem delivering. But for the most part, it's a pickup based business, which is pretty common for home bakers. Um, if I'm doing a pre-sale or a holiday event, sometimes I'll just set up shop, get my little folding table out, and I'll just I'll put a pickup window from a certain time. Sometimes people can't make it, so we'll work something else out. But yeah, and for the most part, I did, like I said, I had set up a website with Squarespace, so they do allow online transactions there. So, but for the most part, it's pretty, either cash, they'll Venmo me, they'll Zelle me. So, I haven't really had an issue with that. But yeah, that's how a lot of the other home bakers, pretty much do it. Like I said, a
Yeah.
lot of us are just, from home. We don't have a brick and mortar yet. So, yeah.
And is there anything anyone should avoid when starting this business? Like any tips or, hey, don't do this, guys?
Um, I think it's give yourself time. Like, don't expect it to be perfect right away because it's not. I fell into the same trap of seeing Instagram reels that showed it to me in 45-second snippets, and I was like, yeah, that's easy. Um, give yourself the time to figure it out. Don't take on an order and expect that you're going to be able to, do it right away. Um, and I think the best advice I can give is to just kind of, do your own style. Like, there's a lot of different when people ask me about it, I kind of liken it to tattoos. So, some tattoo artists are more traditional, some of them are specialized in fine lines and things like that. The same goes for cookiers. Some of us are really good at getting the really minute details, down. Some of us like to do a lot of different patterns. Now they make machines where you can print edible photos on cookies. So, kind of figure out what your style is, what your avenue is going to be. Don't And the other thing I can tell you from experience is don't try to offer everything to everyone. Give yourself a realistic window of what you can get done, and people are, if they're into the product, they're going to buy what you offer. So, um, that's the advice I could give.
Wow, that's incredible. And any other final words of advice to the podcast? About who you are, about your business, about cookie making, and having an incredible side hustle like yours.
Yeah, I would just say, if you're passionate about something, you'll find the time, and there is a group for everyone out there. So, kind of do your research, see where the support is at. Reach out to people. For the most part, if you're interested in something that somebody else is promoting or they're interested in too, chances are they're going to give you the time of day. So, don't feel like, oh, there's some, they're on Instagram every day, they're not going to message me. Chances are they're probably going through their messages looking to give people advice. So, don't be afraid to ask for help.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. I
Well, thank you,
appreciate
Josh.
you for being on here. Super someone order cookies from you.
Yeah. You can find me on Instagram. I'm at Fire and Icing Baking. All my information is on there. You can find me on my website, which is also Fire and Icing Baking, at squarespace.com. So, yeah, check it out.